welcome to Now Chicago. I'm Katie Kioski. Today we're talking about safety on the road. One of the biggest concerns of late is distracted driving. With the advancements in cell phone technology, distracted driving has been an increasing and misunderstood trend. Joining me now is Senior Program Manager of Transportation Initiatives at the National Safety Council, Deb Tromley. Deb, thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Now, Deb, you've been with the NSC for 10 years now.
Correct.
And you've changed positions throughout those 10 years. What is your role within the NSC as it relates to driving safety?
So at NSC, we're a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to prevent injuries and deaths from injuries. And we do that. We look at injuries at work, at home, and on the road. And so my role is to look at that on the road area. Right now, I'm looking at cell phone distracted driving, teen driving. I've worked on a number of traffic safety issues. So, what I focus on is, we all have these questions like, why do people do what they do while they're driving? How do we reduce the risky driving that people do? What does it take to successfully do that? And so I work with business and coalitions in states and sometimes lobbyists who work with state legislators to try to pass strategies that would change behavior. And a lot of times it has to do with policy and enforcing policy and laws as well as education.
Now, people are certainly doing a lot of interesting things while they're driving. I've seen a lot on the road, and I have to admit, I've done a lot myself, including put on makeup, certain things like that, not safe at all. And distracted driving is obviously a huge topic now with cell phones.
Right.
With cell phone advancements, is it still true that most accidents happen within 5 miles of your home?
I have seen insurance company data that shows that, and it makes sense because we spend a lot of time driving close to our homes for errands and such, for going out. So a number of crashes do happen within 5 miles of your home. Most happen within 25 miles of home. Some people are driving a little bit longer to work. But crashes do, it is a local phenomenon. We spend a lot of time driving to the grocery store, driving kids to sports and other after-school activities. So, usually we're driving within a small radius around home, and where that increases your exposure. Where you are is where crashes are likely to happen.
Okay, so even though, many people think, well, because I'm close to home, I'm safe, there's that safety feeling that nothing's going to happen, that it's still true that we need to remind people that, hey, just because you're close to home doesn't mean a crash cannot occur. Yes,
people can often feel familiar, and even if you feel familiar, it's not like a cocoon of safety around you. Really driving is the most dangerous thing we can do in a day. For most of us, we don't have dangerous jobs. It's that drive to and from work and other errands that can be dangerous. So, and there's another phenomenon that happens too, where people, most driving is uneventful. It can be kind of boring. And the more often you drive and nothing happens, you tend to think that it's safe. But, anything can happen at any moment. And so part of our job is to be vigilant and watch for that to happen so we can avoid things.
Now, with cell phones and driving, I think at this point the general public understands that using a cell phone while driving is unsafe, but people are still doing it. According to statistics, how many of us are still using cell phones while we're driving without a hands-free device, and how many crashes is this still causing?
So the federal government tracks this every year, and it's pretty interesting because they put people at intersections, and every year they watch how many people are using phones at those intersections, and then they compile it and they release their numbers. And they just released the latest numbers a few weeks ago, and things haven't really changed. About 1 out of 10 drivers, 10% of drivers are using either a handheld or hands-free phone. It means they're either talking or texting or otherwise manipulating their phones. It could be dialing or using an app. So it's a common behavior. There's other distractions like putting on makeup. We tend to remember when we see those because they're unusual and they might make us a little mad to see other drivers around there doing that. But there aren't 1 out of 10 drivers who are putting on makeup or reading the newspaper while driving. So cell phone use is very common. It is involved in crashes. Unfortunately, we don't know exactly how many crashes involve cell phones. Okay. Yeah, we did a study where we found it's pretty underreported, and that's because people don't always admit when they were using a phone while they were driving. even if they do admit it, police don't always report it on the crash report. And all of our crash numbers come from those crash reports.
Okay, so inconclusive evidence at this point. Let's talk about hands-free driving with the cell phone, because I just assume, hey, it's safe. I'm not holding a cell phone. I'm talking away. I'm completely safe. I've got both hands on the wheel, but the NSC says not true.
Exactly, correct. So, and I can understand how you would think that. There's a lot of people that tell people that, we're marketed to use hands-free devices while we're driving and told that it's safer. Actually, we pulled together the science about 5 years ago, and we found 30 studies that looked at drivers using both handheld and hands-free phones in the same study. So they were doing the same things, like following cars in front of them, and they compared handheld and hands-free use. They found no safety benefit to using the hands-free devices. So both of them had a crash risk, and both of them affected drivers. And the reason why they did is because it's a conversation that can be distracting while we're driving. And this is something most people don't know. It's called mental distraction. There's something that happens called inattention blindness. And it happens because when we're talking, like now, it takes a lot of thought, and driving does as well, obviously. So when people are talking on a phone while driving, it's too much information for the brain to handle.
We cannot multitask as well as we think we can.
Exactly, right. And so what happens is some information doesn't get to the brain. Like you might not see half of the information, even if you're looking through the windshield. So crashes and fatal crashes have happened when people didn't see a red light, they didn't see a stop sign. Pedestrians and bicyclists are really easy to miss seeing.
Easy to miss when you're having that conversation. Someone says something you don't expect, and hey, blew a stop sign. Well, I'd like to hear your opinion. We need to take a short break. I'd like to hear your opinion on hands-free driving when we come back. All that and more coming up after the break. Welcome back to Now Chicago. I'm Katie Kioski. Continuing our discussion today on safer driving is Senior Program Manager of Transportation Initiatives at the National Safety Council, Deb Trombley. Deb, thanks again for joining us.
Absolutely.
Now, Deb, we've been discussing distracted driving, people using cell phones while driving, and using hands-free devices, which you have said is not safe at all for us to be having conversations on the phone. Do you think that we should be allowed to use the phone at all while we're driving?
No, and actually what we recommend, because of what the science shows about the distraction impact on drivers, is that we don't use any phones for conversation, either handheld or hands-free, certainly not texting, and most people know that. Unfortunately, we did a survey last year of American drivers, and 80% of people mistakenly think that hands-free use is safe. So it's wonderful to talk with you today, because we really want to get the word out that it is actually not, and we do see crashes happening because of it.
Is the NSC working towards policy change in this area?
We are. We work with legislators, and the major area where we're working right now is with business, because employers have a big impact on what employees do. A lot of employees are using their phones for business-related purposes while driving, and they feel pressure that they need to return calls from their boss, obviously. They feel like they need to talk while driving to customers or colleagues. So actually work is a big reason why people use phones while driving.
Now let's move on to another topic that may be important, maybe not. A lot of times I see parents in the car with children,
Yes.
and children can be a big distraction. And one of the ways that I think that parents are trying to alleviate that distraction is by playing videos, DVDs in the car for their children to watch. Is this safe?
When the cars first started having videos in them in the ceiling, there were laws passed to make sure that drivers cannot actually see the video, which is an obvious visual distraction. So to have children in the back seat, if it's something that helps keep children quiet, a little calmer, not distracting the driver, always reducing distractions to the driver can be a good thing. I would just advise that parents not, if you're tending to listen to the video playing, you can get caught up in the story mentally, and I advise to try not to do that. But anything that can reduce the children's distraction to the driver in the car can help.
So maybe keep the volume down as much as possible so you're not getting involved in Cinderella or
Exactly.
whatever is playing
Right.
in the back seat there. Now, what about GPS systems and very advanced technology within our cars? Take the cell phone away. How do you feel about GPS systems, satellite radio, and all kinds of other things that you can do in your car?
Well, you know, before GPS, what we had were the big maps, and those were certainly very distracting when you're trying to wrestle with this large piece of paper and you're driving and your route might flip over to the underside and you have to flip them over. So GPS has been a benefit that it helps you navigate in a safer way without having to wrestle with big paper. The one thing we advise is that people set their routes before you start driving, you know, because people know where they're going when they get in a car. It's not something usually decided later. So you know where you're going and set it, either whether you're doing it manually or verbally, set those instructions while you're parked before you drive. Because if you don't, you have to look at the GPS system a little longer. Sometimes it doesn't get things right. You know, we like to say we get in an argument with our GPS lady all the time when we're trying to set instructions. So the best way to keep it safe is just don't look at it, you know, too much.
Okay, so listen to the prompts, try not to look at it, keep your eyes focused on the road.
Exactly.
Now, where are we with drinking and driving? I think, again, along with cell phones, people understand that is not safe. Obviously, people know at this point that drinking and driving is not safe. We've been raised to believe that. Has all of this public education made any difference in statistics?
It's a good question. So if you look back over the past 40 years, since the 1980s, we have seen significant reductions in impaired driving and fatalities from impaired driving. And, you know, in the 80s when a lot of laws were passed and society kind of changed culture so that, you know, people used to say, here, take one for the road. We wouldn't think of doing that today. But the thing is, when you look at the numbers now, for the past 20 years, while the numbers of fatal crashes have dropped, so have all total fatal crashes. So alcohol numbers may be dropping, but if you look at like the proportion of alcohol crashes to all crashes, we haven't made much progress in the last 20 years. So for the last 20 years, about 1/3 of fatal crashes involve alcohol. So it's, you know, not time yet to kind of rest and say we've won that battle, because we haven't. There's still a lot of work to do.
Well, that's very interesting. And what about eating and driving? Because I've seen a lot, as I mentioned earlier, I've seen people do a lot of things in their cars. I've seen people eat a lot of things in their cars, including chicken wings. What do you think about all this? You know, fast food is designed for people to drive up and, you know, designed for people to eat on the go.
It is, you know, and what we say is keeping your hands on the wheel, your eyes on the road, and your mind on driving. All three of those things together help to reduce distraction and crash risks. So if you're trying to eat a hamburger, you know, that could take both your eyes off the road and your hands off the wheel. So we do find that, you know, eating while driving isn't as common as things like cell phones, and that is why we focus so much on cell phones, because people are not even aware of that risk. But I think we do all have a feeling that when you're looking away from the road to grab a cup out of the cup holder or look at a hamburger, that is distracting. We try to minimize the amount of time we're spent doing those things.
Now, we're going to take a short break in a minute and focus on teen driving. But my last question for you is, in the summertime in Chicago, I feel that truly we all share the road. And I equate it to a video game, because I feel like I am dodging something, a pedestrian, someone on a bicycle, another car, about every 2 seconds. If you could say to drivers something about staying safe this summer, what would you say?
You know, I would say keep your mind on driving mostly, and whether it's getting distracted by daydreaming or it's getting distracted by cell phones, you're absolutely right. We all share the roads together. And when we see crashes happen, it's often because somebody wasn't being vigilant. You know, they weren't watching for something that maybe happened unexpectedly. So it's just to be safe drivers, one thing we have to do is be constantly watching further up to anticipate things that could happen. You know, and along with the things we all hear about, like not speeding excessively, not drinking or using drugs while driving, that all impairs our driving.
Oh, it's really about staying mindful and staying conscious as soon as you put that seatbelt on, turn the car on, staying focused on where you're going.
It's our most important job, really, if you think about it.
All right, well, thank you. Well, coming up when we come back, we're going to shift the focus, like I said, to teen driving. A local representative from Impact Teen Drivers joins Deb and I next. That when we return. Welcome back to Now Chicago. I'm Katie Kioski. Car crashes are the #1 cause of death in America's teenage population who are learning how to drive. Our guests today are clearing up some myths and speaking out about how to better educate and prepare our youth for the road. Joining National Safety Council Representative Deb Tromley and I now is Ben Pohl of Impact Teen Drivers. Ben, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Katie.
Now, Ben, you have a personal story with a car crash when you were in high school, which is why you work with Teen Impact Drivers, going around to schools and speaking to teens about the realities of driving and the risks that they take when they're on the road. Tell me a little bit about what happened when you were in high school.
Well, Katie, I was 17, a senior in high school. Big year, you get your first car. So it was a Saturday night. All my friends came in the car, and I was out watching the road, and I crashed in 6 months, hospital, and spent 2 years relearning to walk and talk. So that kind of hits home, the whole teen driving aspect. If I could just help one teen not go through what I did, it's all worth it. So.
And you say, being part of Impact Teen Drivers, your story really hits home with
Sure.
some teenagers because you say you were in their seat. You remember when somebody came into your classroom and maybe showed a video in driver's ed, and all you were thinking about was what's for lunch.
Yeah, it was interesting. Actually, when I go to a high school and speak, it's very interesting because I was in their chair, like you said, when I was in high school, and just thinking about when's class going to be over, what am I going to do after school. But I think it really meshes well because when I get up there and I can really, have the students, put myself in their shoes, and they understand that, this stuff's for real, and we're not just saying things, it's not a job. We're doing it because we care, and we actually know what can happen. So I think that's really important, and I think that has the greatest effect on the high schoolers.
Now, you attribute your crash to, #1, being distracted by passengers in your car, and #2, just lack of experience. Sure. Deb, what do you see as far as statistics and the dangers of having other passengers, especially friends, in the car when teenagers are driving?
Sure. Actually, for teen drivers, for new teen drivers, having their friends in the car